Well, hi, everybody. It's David Leis here, your proud host on Leaders on the Frontier, and a welcome to everybody joining us from coast to coast on May the 8th, 2025, the year of our Lord. And I'm very excited. Um, Maybe that's not the best word. I think this is a very important discussion about the state of Canada. You may know that we had a federal election and there's a lot of implications of that for our country as we look at a lot of, well, different divisions, policy choices that will determine, frankly, whether our country will be bright or will continue on a decline. So I do have three guests joining us. I'm very excited about the expertise that they bring and their unique insights to the state of our nation. And I did want to reflect on a few headlines as people gather around. We are so appreciative of the audience's involvement, and we look forward to your comments and questions. So thank you for joining us, and we really do appreciate it. Please give us a like. That's always appreciated. But your comments are so important. We've found that we just have thousands of people join us for these sessions, and then we record them and they go out as well. And the response has been incredible as we get literally hundreds of comments from our live alone. So at the top of the news, I would be remiss if I did not underline that just a few moments ago, we learned that we have a new pope. You may not have heard that, but it is Robert Francis Prevost, and he becomes the first American pope. And he is just joined us. His name will be Pope Leo the 14th. And it's something shortly after 6 p.m. Rome time. A white billow of smoke emerged from the Sistine Chapel, and I had the honor of being there last June. It is an extraordinary place, and so with that white billowing smoke was the signal that after some 2 days, 133 senior cardinals of the church gathered, and they reached the two-thirds threshold to select the new pope. Again, that's Pope Leo the 14th. In other news, we heard the U.S. Trump administration announced today a trade deal with the United Kingdom. It sounds like it's kind of the framework, the first phase, if you will, for cutting tariffs on most British imports, including steel and vehicles. So that's a very interesting precedent for Canada, as our Prime Minister Mark Carney met with Donald Trump, and we'll certainly talk about that today with our guests. And in related news, I believe Prime Minister Mark Carney announced a premiers meeting on June the 2nd, a summit, if you will, in Saskatchewan. And in other news, energy CEOs in Canada, some 38 of them, did an open letter to the Prime Minister calling for the scrapping of many things, including emissions policies, the industrial carbon tax. And according to the Epoch Times, this letter was penned on April the 30th. And of course, it calls for the rebuilding and expansion of our energy infrastructure. So it's a very interesting letter, and be sure to look at that. So today we're talking about the state of Canada and talking about the aftermath of an election. What does the future hold? Is Alberta going to be bluntly part of it, or Saskatchewan, or other parts of the West? What's the policy pathway forward? So I am very delighted to welcome our guests onto the program. And I want to begin with Nigel Hannaford, who's the opinion editor with the Western Standard. Welcome, Nigel.
Good afternoon, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to see you, my friend. And we also have Bruce Pardy, law professor at Queen's, and he's an all-around good guy. So welcome, Bruce.
Thanks, David. Great to be here.
And great to see you. And of course, the Terry Etam, who's a dear friend from Alberta, right in the heart of oil country. And he's not only in the industry, he's a very interesting columnist and author. A warm welcome to you, Terry.
Thank you, David. Nice to be here.
Well, we came out of the election, and I want to just go around the table quickly and say what came out of this election. Is there some key observations that you have in terms of the issues and what happened during this last election? Nigel, do you want to tackle that one first?
Sure, I can lead. So, the election revealed that in Eastern Canada, the Liberal brand still has considerable cachet, notwithstanding the last 10 years during which it was assaulted brutally by Justin Trudeau. The the sad thing is that, and I speak, when I say sad, I speak as somebody who lives in Alberta and takes his cue from Alberta, is that the kind of considerations that Eastern voters had in mind when they went to the polls are not the things that really were fundamental to this country. They thought it was, which is why they voted on Trump, who is best to deliver us from Donald Trump. But in actual fact, as we will see during the summer, this country has very serious issues of unity and of the economy. And that is not what people were voting on back east, where they gave the Liberals not quite a majority. Most unfortunate. They were, they didn't like, some of them didn't like Pierre Poilievre, thought he was too chippy. Some of them perhaps actually did like Mr. Carney and felt safe in the hands of a banker. We weren't voting on that out here in Alberta.
Okay, so there's a divide of what you would say, Nigel, people voted for. And it is truly fascinating how we had an about face with Pierre Poilievre with a significant lead with the Conservatives, and then kind of an about face. Have you seen that kind of that kind of significant change of the electoral tide in your experience?
No, I think that's a first. I've seen some massive upsets, but they were upsets that could have been predicted. I think perhaps of the 1993 election, in which the Progressive Conservative Party was reduced to just two members from a towering majority. But you could see that shaping up, and you could see why it was going to happen. In this case, it all changed in about 6 weeks, because in January and February, Pierre Poilievre was still looking at a majority government, a supermajority. Then the Liberals did the only thing they could do, which was to remove the failing Prime Minister and insert somebody else in the hope that things would go better, and in fact they did.
Okay, Bruce, what was your observation about this election and its outcome?
Well, I agree with Nigel's assessment very much. To me, Canada is broken. It's very seriously broken, and I didn't see anything during this election really that would suggest that we are on the precipice of fixing any of those problems. Nigel's point that this became in Eastern and Central Canada a vote about Donald Trump, I think, is accurate. Donald Trump, to me, represents the best possibility for reforming this country, frankly, because of his poking. So, in that respect, and in many others, I think we're simply on the wrong foot. I think that the results are going to, and the signs are, it's already begun, that they're going to heat up the pressure in Alberta and perhaps other places to consider leaving Confederation, and I think justifiably so. So if you'd like to take a silver lining from the results, that would be it. I think time is long past that Alberta ought to take a good, hard, realistic look at how it has fared inside the country and think about setting a different path.
Okay, so there you have it. Try to listen carefully to our guests, and I heard the phrase Canada is broken. Why do you say that?
Well, because Canada is gripped by, it's gripped by if I can put it this way, a socialist progressive managerialism.
Mm, hmm
And that idea is held not only by the federal government, not only by the provincial governments, but the by many of the people, by most of the people.
Mhm.
I don't think there's any even awareness on behalf of the greater part of the population that is the nature of the situation that we're in. Let me put it another way. In the United States at the moment, they have at least given themselves a shot. They are at least trying to turn the page on a system of government that has grown out of control. I don't know whether they'll succeed or not. It remains to be seen. Time will
Mhm.
tell. But the project is at least is at least alive in the U.S. In Canada, we have so far rejected even the prospect of the legitimacy of that kind of a project. The
Mhm.
idea, for example, of having a Doge in Canada simply hasn't even entered the public space.
Mhm.
And so, in many respects, although the countries are very similar in some ways, they're also very different, and they are different in this respect in a way which leaves us very far behind where the states has headed.
All right. Well,
David,
thank
I
you,
wonder if
Bruce,
I
for
could
that
just add a
analysis.
paragraph to what Bruce has said there on the subject of a broken Canada. Uh, when we use that phrase, we usually think about things that do not work, but what is truly broken here is federalism itself.
Mm.
And the good news is that can be readily restored if the Prime Minister we now have actually decides that, unlike his predecessor, he will stay, I'm using Daniel Smith's line here, stay in his lane and just have the federal government do what the federal government does and leave
Mhm.
the provinces to do what the provinces are constitutionally empowered to do. It's when the federal government tried to do an end run around provincial rights that things really started to come undone and allowed us to say with a straight face in polite society that Canada is broken.
Okay, so that's the point, is that there's a bigger layer of context. This was not just simply about parties having an electoral match. There's bigger issues that are challenging Canada. It's the size of the state, as you've alluded to, Bruce, as well as the constitutional matters, where you have the federal government has this significant pattern of poking its nose into the affairs of really provincial jurisdiction. I think that's kind of the high level summary. So we've got a lot of challenges in this country. So, Terry, what are your thoughts about the outcome of this election? And are we all talking nonsense, or what, are we
No,
onto
no, this is a
something
very
here?
wise panel. Hard to keep up with. I was,
Okay.
I was disappointed on a couple of fronts. Both gentlemen make great points. One is that it seems that we just slipped into the cult of personality problem again.
Mhm.
Every Trudeau came in on his Sunny Ways platform and new hope for a new future, and people bought into it, and it dissolved into nothingness when people realized what was behind the facade. Then we were faced with what appeared to be an existential crisis from Trump's strategies, and more on that. And everyone just leapt to the person that gave them comfort again. I heard a lot of comments that, well, I didn't like Polyev, he's annoying, or he's abrasive, or whatever. And it's like, well, I have comfort in him. He's a banker. Surely he knows what he's talking about. None of them have read his book, which is Socialist Doctrine. I only made it through the first chapter, and I was done. Um, and I think that the sad part for me is that, or ironic maybe too, is that what Trump did shocked Canadians to go for what they felt they saw comfort in. But also, what Trump did was he shone the light on the dark corners of Canada that needed a light shining on them. And
Mhm.
we have to own up to how we've devolved into this mess. The the problems with our border, the drug problems, the overreaching control of the federal government, the and it's the Canadians seem not to understand, or the voting population, which I think is core to the problem of Alberta alienation, which you'll get to, and other parts of the country, is that the voting power is so concentrated. I don't know what you do about that, but there's a good quote I just want to read here from. There's a guy from NS Lyons who writes on Substack, an American guy, and he had this to say about Canada. many Canadians here may not be aware of just how your government appears from the outside, but I'm afraid it's not a good look at all. Unfortunately, I must report that when many of us look at Canada, what we see is a global leader in progressive authoritarianism, out of control migration, growing anarcho tyranny, foreign subversion, and ideologically induced economic stagnation. And I think what Trump did was to shine the light on Canada and say, you have a lot of problems, and the U.S. is trying to right their own ship in their own way. That's their prerogative. They can do what they want. We have to do what we need to. But I don't think Canadians grasp the real problem here. The problem isn't that we needed a figure to react to what Trump is trying to do, at least not in this way. And we saw in the meeting with Carney and Trump that I don't think he's up for the job, but we'll find that out over time. So I was just very disappointed that Canadians sort of panicked and leapt to something that leapt to a comfort blanket again.
So Terry, is part of your thesis is that emotion? I mean, in an ideal world, electoral, um, in an election, we have kind of a rational discourse about public policy, but there was something else that was profound going on. So, are you alluding to emotions like fear played a major role in this election?
Well, yeah, to some extent, like emotion cuts both ways because it was the anger at Trudeau that got Polyev so high in the polls, which was not a bad thing. People had had enough of it. So it's the emotion is like all over the map. But I think the core issues just haven't been addressed, and I do see signs of hope that, and I again I kind of say that Trump is the cause of all of this in a good way in one sense. When Premier Ford the other day said that he told Carney that you need to show more respect to the prairie provinces because frankly your party hasn't done it for a decade. So that was like really refreshing to hear. Maybe because it's a crisis that people are actually talking and thinking this way, but it's just refreshing maybe to hear something like that. But it is time for big change here, and we haven't elected for big change. We're going to see the same faces in cabinet. I'm just skeptical about how Carney does an about face. He wrote a book called Values, and the only way he's going to be successful as a Canadian leader is as if he abandons those values completely. And I don't know if that's a mark of success, but that's the only way that we get ahead is if that happens, which is a sickening thought, but that's where we're at. So,
Bruce, do you think that there are some signs of hope in all this? I mean, you used the phrase Canada's broken, and I can see why. But do you see any pathways to hope here for our country?
For the country as a whole in its present organization, no.
Okay.
The source of hope for me, frankly, right now is Alberta and any other place that might like to join the parade. I do not think that the problems that plague us in this country are a simple matter of policy. I mean, we have
Hmm.
policy problems for sure.
Hmm.
A whole series of bad decisions made over the past decade at least, for sure, no question about it. But I do not think part of my concern with the Alberta push for separation is that they will succeed in extracting from the federal government some kind of concessions that will put the thing off so that the basic model that we now have will continue. And
Interesting.
any solutions that will be offered will be very short-term, partial solutions. The problem in this country, for me, are very deeply embedded. They're partly in our Constitution. Our Constitution worked quite well for a time. It doesn't. It's
Hmm.
not working very well now. We have all kinds of problems that are not limited to the elected government. They are also in the bureaucracy at all levels of government. They are in our courts. I do not think that a simple conversation with the new prime minister will really fix anything, even if it happened to be that that individual was receptive, which I he might appear to be. I don't know what the actual permutations will be, but I think it would be very difficult to provide to Alberta what Alberta rightly needs, and yet continue on the path that the rest of the country has been on. and will insist to continue to be on because that's the way that the thing manages to persist.
Okay, so we've got some pretty incisive comments coming out of this esteemed group of guests here. And Bruce, you're really underlining that there's deeper issues at play here, and we need to open our eyes up to them. And so, one of the things I wanted to do before I turn to Nigel is I wanted to share a clip from the Premier of Saskatchewan. So, I think Premier Moe is calling for kind of a reset here, and then we'll turn to Daniel Smith in terms of what's happening there.
Can't hear him.
I can't hear him.
No, I can't either.
Um, yeah, I can't hear either.
I like the flags though.
Okay, they're beautiful flags. All right, that clip, and I'm sorry that some of you could not hear it, really underlined how Premier Moe was calling for really a message of both collaboration, but also a clear statement saying we need a reset in the federal-provincial relationship. And so now, I mean, that doesn't surprise you, does it, Nigel?
No, I'd hate to be Mark Carney at the moment, despite his apparent success. He has finally got inside the Prime Minister's office in the main chair, as opposed to standing beside the chair, from which position he has been offering advice that may or may not have been accepted by Mr. Trudeau. But he finally has a full appreciation of just how much of a mess Canada has become over the last 10 years as a result of poor policy. I was speaking to somebody who you probably know quite well, David Knight-Legg. So I'm stealing his line, and he said, Mr. Carney has just been mugged by reality. And now, the reason that it's worth talking about this is that the fear that we have all expressed editorially is that this green enthusiast who wrote this execrable book, Values, that Terry, you're right, it is it's a dreadful read, dreadful piece of prose. I have tried it, but he's been saying all these things for all these years, trying to drive investment out of the energy industry. He advised a government that put many of those ideas into practice and has, if not succeeded, made an incredibly big dent in it. I mean, it's like about $400 billion in investment that has gone somewhere else. And now he sees the consequences. And it's on him to fix it or go down in history as being one of the worst prime ministers we've ever had, exceeded in his worstness only by the one who came before. Now, there is for those who want Canada, and I know Bruce is probably going to challenge me on this, but for those who want Canada, there is a ray of hope, because the one place that you can generate that sort of money is right here in Alberta. We have been carrying Confederation in Alberta for decades. When you look at where the money comes from and where it goes, you can argue around the edges, but Alberta has kept this country afloat. And Alberta was condemned by the previous government of Canada. Mr. Trudeau, was on record of saying things like, the problem when Harper was in office, too many Albertans in the cabinet. He had no use for Albertans. He said so frequently, and people took it as rejection because that's what it was. Well, now, if they choose to accept it, there is a path forward in which Mr. Carney accepts the truth of what Premier Smith is saying. And by the way, these are not demands that she's making. She is only calling for the federal government to start doing the Constitution the way it was always amended. So it need not be a big leap for Mr. Carney. He doesn't have to worry what he's going to say to his Green friends. He just needs to start letting Alberta go out, do its job, make money, and he will find that things could come together. Now, whether that'll happen or not, he's got the summer, I would say.
Okay, so Nigel, it sounds like a key question then, outcome of this election and this moment that we're in now, is what policy path will Prime Minister Carney pursue? Will he be like the climate zealot central banker, net zero Carney, or will he be the pragmatic politician, newly elected, who will say this is reality of where we're at? I mean, I think it strikes me as a very interesting question as he faces Donald Trump here in a meeting, and it's interesting that he certainly had his comments there. But can you help me understand that situation? Are you optimistic, Terry, that we'll see a more pragmatic politician that Nigel's hoping for?
I don't really think so. I certainly understand Bruce's point. Well, I think Carney might try, but I think we do come back to a few structural problems. One is that just it's concentric circles of power issue, I call it, where the hinterlands just don't have the same voices where all of the voters are, and I don't know how that gets resolved as long as as Southern Ontario and Quebec remain as vote dense as they are. They will go back to that well time and again to get elected. So I don't know how that gets resolved for the Western economic powerhouse. And I broadened my net a little bit more. I include Saskatchewan and parts of the prairies, which are sort of all in this together.
Indeed.
But one issue on the energy front, and both these commentators are right, that the hits on Alberta have been immense and personal and specific. One issue on the energy side is that the energy sector will not stop doing what it does. The pipelines are continuous flow for both oil and for natural gas. I've heard countless times, I wish we could shut in the pipelines for a week and teach people a lesson, especially at the height of the green madness. You want to live without hydrocarbons? We'll let you live without You can't, it just doesn't work that way. The contractual obligations, the moral obligations to keep, cutting people's fuel off is as immoral as it gets, which is the sort of the thing that Carney's been promoting behind the scenes until, like Nigel said, he gets the power now and he realizes maybe what that means, or people in parts of the world that have actually succeeded, like Spain, where they've gone to renewables and they're facing blackouts now, or Germany, which is deindustrialized. But in Canada, I think that the Gerald Butts of the equation have figured out that Alberta will keep pumping oil. You slap a tax on them, they'll keep pumping oil. They'll keep going down until the marginal cost of production hits the trouble spot. Natural gas you can't depressurize the natural gas system. We'll keep doing what we do. They know that. And so I think this is maybe what Bruce is speaking about. And I have a vast gap of knowledge here of what the options are. Is it separation or try and cut a deal with Ottawa? Like, what's in between? I would love to know what's in between, because at the end of the day, I do think that if I picture, like, the core of Calgary is quite red and the core of Edmonton is quite red, and it's very vote rich again, and they're the people that have voted the NDP in power. They still support the NDP. We've voted in Liberal MPs, which is unbelievable to me, but we have. And so that core, when it comes down to putting their name on, will you separate from Canada? I don't know how that happens. But I'd love to know if that's 100% and the status quo is 0, I'd love to know what 80 or 90% is. How do we do something different? And I don't know. Can we form some sort of economic union with the U.S.? Can we tell them we're going to we will keep sending you our oil, and we need this from you. What's within the provincial jurisdiction versus the federal, I don't know, but I hope we explore that along with separation.
Okay. So, Bruce, you cited earlier that you saw a sign of hope, interesting enough, to be Alberta or other Western like minded provinces. Can you answer Terry's question about what could be a pathway forward of hope, given that reference to, well, in this case, Alberta?
Yes, sure. Well, so there's obviously more than one possibility, but I think there's only one viable possibility. And that viable possibility is separation. Because the rest of Canada has no reason to change things otherwise. They're only threatened if Alberta is going. I really don't have my finger on the pulse of how viable separation is amongst the population in Alberta. I don't have a sixth sense of that. I'm not there. But I can tell you what the pulse of the matter is outside, like here in Ontario where I am. And that is that the people don't care much about this at all.
Yes.
I mean, Nigel is correct that Alberta has carried Confederation for a good while. And most people don't understand that, and if they do, they don't care. Because
Okay.
through the eyes of an awful lot of other Canadians, the oil sands and the natural resources in Alberta and elsewhere are Canadian. They're not Albertan. Let me put it this way. This is a lot like Lucy and the football. Charlie Brown is Alberta. I don't think it matters a whit what Carney does or does not do. Surely you've done this enough times to know that Canada as a federal government and as a confederation is not prepared to fix the problems that Alberta has been identifying for decades. Decades.
Decades.
You're not going to try again to ask politely. Surely not. The only way to get a response from the powers that be, the vested interests that govern Canada, is to tell them that you're leaving. And only in that moment you will find out how much they value you to stay.
Wow. Okay, so Charlie Brown, I know why I read that comic for a reason. So
I
thanks
used
for
that analogy
connecting the
last week
dots,
myself.
Bruce.
Yeah.
Okay, and Terry as well. Hey, this audience is terrific, and I can now see the chat better here. And I just want to remind the audience that we're having this incredible conversation with my friends Terry Etam, author and leader within the industry of oil and gas, Nigel Hannaford, opinion editor with the Western Standard, and of course, Bruce Pardy, law professor at Queen's University. This is quite an eye-opening discussion. I hope you find it helpful. And it's interesting. Tommy says people in Ontario and Quebec don't care that Alberta sends them billions. And for that reason, we should stop sending them billions. I'm going to turn to Nigel Hannaford with the question. It's been coined a phrase, the West wants in, years ago. Does the question now, is it the West wants out? Is it really that clear, Nigel?
I think for some people it is. And it isn't just the money, it is also the continued rejection of Western values and just Western esteem by certain people within the Liberal government who have taken it upon themselves to make moral judgments on how things are done out in Alberta. I wonder if we might just make a brief diversion. That picture you had of Mr. Carney sitting with Mr. Trump, if it's possible, yes, that's the one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, the Eastern consensus, and I think this really illustrates the East-West feeling rather well. The Eastern consensus, looking at that picture, is that Mr. Carney did well. He used the Oval Office to say that Canada was not for sale. Good for him, that's the right thing to say, in front of the bully Trump. Well, okay, he did that. On the other hand, that is really all he did. And it's all he could do. I would not have advised him. No responsible advisor would have suggested that he did what Volodymyr Zelensky did and say what he really thought. So he kissed the ring, and he did what he could to smooth things over and set the stage for further discussions. Now, when Premier Danielle Smith goes down to the United States, and she meets the president, and she meets the members of the cabinet, and she meets people who are going to be influential within the politics of the United States, and she talks with state governors, she is doing that same thing. She is laying the foundations for what is to come next, which is all it can be a negotiated settlement. And what is the judgment of Eastern Canadian commentators and the government of Canada itself, but that she is not on the team. She is a traitor. She should stay home and let big people take care of this. And if you're trying to understand why 30% of people in Alberta are open at the moment to the idea of independence, it's things like that as much as the money.
I think you're right. Very good comment, Nigel. So, it struck me as a very interesting decision that the team enabled the Prime Minister to go straight into the Oval Office, straight into the den there, where you have the President of the United States on the edge of their yellow chairs there, and really being in an environment where, well, how do you enable a kind of a coherent discussion? I'm not saying that Donald Trump is unpredictable, but he has those edges where he's always negotiating. He's positioning, at least in my opinion, for setting the ground for its relationship, its negotiation with Canada. So we even have a clip here where it's interesting. There's a little bit of a quip and comeback that Prime Minister Carney did have. And I think that clip is really not quite available yet, but you'll recall that Prime Minister Carney weighed in and said the real estate is not for sale here.
Yeah, and he did well with that. Okay, that was the right thing to say.
Okay.
No.
But you got to go understand that when you go into that situation, you go into the Oval Office, you are surrounded by the press corps. You are by remove, you're surrounded by the American public. You're talking to arguably the most important man of the world, the most powerful man in the world, and he will use that power for tactical advantage. Everything is against you. You're a gladiator in the den with the lions and you have no sword. So I do not join those who say that Mr. Carney wasted his time, but just want to come back to that point when our own Premier does what Carney is trying to do there in rather more favorable circumstances. She gets no thanks for it.
Okay. So I did want to pick up the significant announcements that were made by Premier Danielle Smith of Alberta. We have a clip here where she has a significant announcement where she's really laying out the accord in terms of the process to move this discussion forward, and also setting the bar, lowering it from some 20% to 10%. So she's really, as I read it, trying to pay very close attention to those voices within the province that are seeking sovereignty outside of Canada. And she's trying to respect this tradition of paying attention to, well, what is it again? Oh yeah, the people's voice in a democratic way. So I think we have this clip if it's available, Madam Producer.
Now, as we all know, one thing has changed. We have a new Prime Minister. I will say that in my first conversation with him since the election, he has some promising things to say about changing the direction of his government's anti-resource policies. However, Albertans are more of a actions speak louder than words kind of people. So while I will in good faith work with Prime Minister Mark Carney on unwinding the mountain of destructive legislation and policies that have ravaged our provincial and national economies this past decade, until I see tangible proof of real change, Alberta will be taking steps to better protect ourselves from Ottawa.
So there you go. So I'm going to turn to you, Terry, because you're very familiar with the energy industry, and that's just one slice of the issues or concerns or grievances that Alberta has, or Premier Smith has articulated. Is it very clear what needs to change for not just the oil and energy industry in Canada to thrive, but for Alberta and the rest of the country to thrive? Or what are the things that you think really needs to happen?
Well, starting with the Alberta side, and I have to agree with Bruce here to some extent that the energy sector has been beaten down from the Greta years all the way down to the point where it's like a battered spouse syndrome now, where we say, oh, he's not so bad, he didn't beat me up on the weekend, like he's a pretty good guy. Like Alberta is fighting for the right to be able to sell their product on internet, to get their product to market, which is it's just absurd that's our battle, that we have to fight to get a tanker ban lifted so that we can sell our product to a hungry world. The countries that come to Canada wanting LNG, and we say there's no business case for it, and so they go somewhere else and get it. It's just, so we have to reset the bar so much higher to and not just negotiate and say we can't call it a win if we get another pipeline to the coast. I think it's just such a much bigger reset that needs to happen. That's one reason I applaud what Premier Smith is saying, is like, no, we don't want this patched. You have to throw everything out and start again. And I think that sort of applies to Canada as well. It's just the Laurentian elite is a cliche, and I know you get beat up for even using the term, but it's that is such an embedded culture of running the country the way that they think it should be run, without understanding anything about the rest of the country, how it works or functions, or how it actually is. One thing you mentioned earlier about the equalization payments, or the perception in parts of Canada, like that is Alberta tired of it? But you hear voices out of Quebec that insist that the opposite is happening, that they're the ones that contribute more to Canada than they get. And I've heard from people, it's anecdotal, but people move out here to Alberta from Quebec and they're like, I had no idea that this is what it was like. Like we're taught the opposite. Like this is just such an alien landscape, not physically, but just their viewpoint on the world, like what they've been indoctrinated in. And I don't know that Ottawa is much different, that once you get absorbed in that culture, it's like, we're the ones that make the decisions. We know, we have the power, we're used to it. Alberta will keep doing what they do. Are Saskatchewan farmers going to quit growing grain because they're upset? Ha ha ha. They keep doing what they do, and they know that, and they can just put that in the bank, and yeah, so we'll slap something on them. We'll worry about this. Like, where's our votes coming from for the next election? And right I'm happy to see the discussion turn to not band-aids. Something's broken, and again, I'll reiterate, it took Trump to do this. He's the one that said, you guys are a mess, and you won't see that yourself. And like that voice I mentioned earlier, the rest of the world sees what we are, and Canada has to wake up and stop voting for people that give them comfort, and recognize that there's big issues at play here. And if Alberta pursuing separation, and I'm like, I live here, Bruce, and I don't know what the actual pulse is when it comes time to put people's name on paper. Maybe it flies, maybe it doesn't. It probably is 30%, and maybe that could go to 50% if we have a real visionary leader with like a real positive path forward. And you can easily make the very positive image of what the West unleashed could do. Now, not just the West, but like the parts of Canada that just are ignored by Ottawa because they don't matter. It's just we're a resource-rich nation that we need to take advantage of that first and recognize that. And I think that was a missed opportunity for Carney in the White House. He could have said, this is President Trump home. Thanks for inviting me. The most powerful office in the world. You're doing what you were elected to do. We understand. Here's what I'm elected to do. Canada produces more than it uses because we have a small population and we're one of the most resource-rich countries in the world. We need to find customers, and we will find customers. And if it's not our best customer, we will try to find other customers. I think that I don't know. That was an embarrassment to see Carney with Trump in there. He just looked totally out of his element.
Okay.
He said what he had to do to stay alive, and he didn't put his head in a noose, but I just didn't see leadership there.
Okay, so
Doug.
that's your take on it, Terry. So Bruce, what's your sense of that meeting and where we're at as a country in our relationship with the United States? Are we, frankly, in trouble as the UK? Pardon me, is it the UK today that we
Yes,
announced
UK today. Yeah.
a new trade
Yeah,
deal?
yeah, we are. Well, we're in trouble, but not because of Trump. I mean, Trump is now acting in the interest of America, as he should. And our governments don't seem to be able to act in our interests because there are so many vested interests that they can't see the interest of the country as a whole.
Ah,
Right.
interesting.
Uh,
So
but
when you say
yeah,
vested interests,
yes.
can you help us
Well,
understand what you
let's
mean by
just take
that?
one example. Just take one example. I mean, so when the Trump tariffs were announced, all the Canadian elite were outraged and said things like, tariffs hurt both sides. But the fact of
Hmm.
the matter is, we have enormous tariffs already on American goods and American companies. We have supply management.
Right.
I mean,
Yes.
if you can't say that with a straight face and mean it in this country.
Hmm.
We have tariffs on other countries that are enormous. We have tariff-like restrictions between provinces, for goodness sakes.
Hmm.
For them to stand up and say that tariffs hurt both sides is ridiculous.
Bruce, are
But
you not committed to the fight for the right of Canadians to pay more for butter than they need? Come on.
right, exactly. But let's acknowledge this. So Danielle Smith is being an astute politician. I mean, she's positioned herself very well, right? Because she's legitimized separatist sentiments without embracing it.
Hmm.
I mean, those
Yeah.
people are part of her base, and
Right.
so I think she's politically smart to legitimize them without getting to the front of the parade just yet because she doesn't know where the parade is going. Okay,
Hmm.
but Terry used a metaphor that I've used in the past as well, which is the battered spouse syndrome, which is kind of appropriate here because you have a relationship, Alberta federal government, and it is a relationship under which Alberta has been abused for a long, long time.
Hmm.
And of those two parties, it is Alberta that is more concerned about making peace with the federal government on the theory that, well, maybe we're just misunderstood, or maybe people don't appreciate how much we paid into Confederation, or maybe they can just
Hmm.
change their ways. That
Hmm.
is not going to happen. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it can happen. You really want, if you know you're making progress, if they come to you and say, look, we recognize that things are wrong and have been wrong for a long time, and we will fix them. Please don't go. Nobody has said that. Note the
Hmm.
difference in the reaction to the separatist sentiment in Alberta compared to what the reaction was to the same kind of sentiment in Quebec years ago. When
But
Quebec
mostly in
raised this
Alberta.
sentiment,
Yeah.
the reaction from the rest of Canada was, "We're so sorry you feel this way. What can we do?" And the reaction to Alberta sentiment is, "How dare you? How dare you suggest that you're not being treated well? Get back in line." And that's how you know you're in trouble.
What do you think, Nigel?
I think, to Bruce Pardy's point, that Danielle Smith has now emerged as the opposition to the Liberal government in Canada. I mean no disrespect to Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party, who've done fantastically well in the last election, increasing their seat count and yielding more than 8 million votes to the party. That's 2 million more than Mr. Harper ever got. But if you want to see where the difference in the viewpoint between Eastern Canada crystallizes and this Liberal government that basically represents Eastern Canada and Western Canada, then who is it? It's not Dave Eby, the Premier of BC. With due respect to Scott Moe, he got second to the game. And Mr. Kinnew in Manitoba is not representing the one person who has got a different point of view from the government and is in a position to insist upon it, as opposed to the official opposition that isn't, is Danielle Smith. And this is a remarkable and probably temporary situation where a premier stands as the opposition to a prime minister. And I would say this, you asked me what I think, I would say this, if Mr. Carney does not yield on the points that Terry was mentioning earlier, the Bill C-69, the no pipeline bill, the no tanker bill, if he insists on an emissions cap, what will happen is that Alberta will simply walk away and it'll take Saskatchewan with it. That is his great challenge, and that is where his government could come unstuck. He has got the summer to do this. If it's not clear that we're coming together, then his administration is going to be one of profound failure.
Okay. I think that
And he needs to start now, David. Never mind wait till June
Can I,
the 2nd.
can I reframe that though? So, I mean, fair enough, but I don't think at this particular moment in time that what Carney does is the most important thing. I think the ball is in the court of the Albertans, because I think at this stage Alberta should understand that the nature of the chance that suddenly the country is going to reinvent itself in order to keep Alberta happy. That chance is so very small, and you've tried that so many times. So, by all means, I mean, if some miracle happens and Carney turns out to be something else than we would expect, fine. But don't wait to see what happens, because you've done that so many times before.
Oh, I agree. You have to keep your powder dry.
Okay, so I'm listening carefully to this discussion. I really appreciate it on so many levels, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say the platitude first before I get to my points, and that would be the platitude is that we all agree that Canada is an incredible country. We should be given what we all have, our natural resources, people, everything. We should be the wealthiest, freest nation on earth, but we're not. And we have stagnated the last many years. And I really would remiss if I wouldn't say I really believe, as I reflect on this is just from my humble perspective, that this is a more urgent situation. And maybe this is a question to get some reality therapy here, as I use that phrase. Our nation is far more vulnerable than we realize, because not only have we stagnated, in many respects, it's a hostile place to do business.
Mm-hmm.
There are exceptions, but the flow of capital, of money, goes downhill like water. And all you have to do is look at those numbers. You look at some of the credit downgrades that are happening with various provinces. You also have a little bit of a foreshadow with Finch and Company when it comes to federal debt. So I don't pretend to be a bond trader, but I do know that elections don't not only have the voters who cast a vote, but the bondholders themselves ultimately have a vote. As a country, whether Canada is a place to do business and invest your money. And ultimately, that's the foundation for a society. And I see a situation where I think that I'm not sure if I sense the full urgency of this situation before us, because I look at this and I say, why would we not be calling a real national emergency? And maybe that's not quite the right word, but to get on with building this country by dealing with the things that we know needs to empower the oil and gas industry, but empower all of the economy. I mean, if you're stagnant for 10 years, and the stats show that, I mean, it also shows that we are in a echo chamber where I don't want to just lay everything at the feet of the legacy media, but I will. I don't think Canadians are hearing each other from coast to coast. They don't have a clue about the economy. They don't have a clue about how much angst there is. I mean, I saw you, Bruce, last week in Ottawa, and I had my meetings too, and I feel like, you know, people in Eastern Canada don't understand how visceral this is. This is a perceived existential moment for the West in many quarters. And it's not just Saskatchewan and Alberta. I look at the numbers. There was a poll that came out in BC, 28% want to look at some form of separation. And you've got people in largely small town rural Manitoba also talking about where do we fit into this? So I think our country is a little bit more in the balance than perhaps we want to admit. Or am I being too dramatic, gentlemen? What are
Mm-mm.
your thoughts? Bruce?
No, I think you're right on. So frankly, as someone from Ontario, I'm thinking that Alberta is the country's best hope. I think you need to disrupt the country to save the country. I don't think the country in its present form can succeed to the advantage of its citizens. It needs to be disrupted, and Alberta is the best bet to do that. Now, I'm not suggesting Alberta has a responsibility to save the country, but if Alberta acts in its own self-interest
Mm-hmm.
and reaches the resolution that Canada no longer works and they want to leave, then that will either create a sort of domino effect or a cascade, or it will shake the country to its core. And only then do you have any chance of actually reforming the country the way it needs to be done.
Your thoughts, Terry?
A couple of points there. For the it's a cliche, but education is part of the issues. I spent summers in Nova Scotia, and wonderful people. I get to discuss. I try to discuss politics as little as possible, but there's a couple of things that people like to talk about. One is energy, and the other is climate change. And they're both so fundamentally misunderstood or just flat out erroneous. What people know about energy is like beyond abysmal. They know so little. At the same time, they've been brainwashed by this federal machine about the glory of a green future. And I'm not unique. Most people here in the oil patch could have told you that what's happening in Spain was inevitable, or that Germany would deindustrialize, or
Terry,
anyone.
can you just please clarify, because that's a very important story. What happened in Spain? Because I think this is a very important case study that people need to know about.
Right. So Spain was recently hit by a massive power outage that took I think it was more than 12 hours for power to be reestablished. And when it happened, power systems are complex things. And the first instances after acknowledgement that there was an issue, all the politicians and leapt in and said, renewables are not to blame. We'll figure out what it is, but we don't know what it is, but renewables are not to blame, which is pretty amazing statement to make in itself. And it turned out, of course, that renewables were to blame, and over-reliance on intermittent power that can be tripped off by circumstances that are unforeseen, or if it becomes cloudy, then solar output gets cut by 70%. There's one quick example, an anecdote. In Australia, they've gone very heavily into solar, and Western Australia has become very reliant on solar. They discovered a very strange phenomenon, but a potentially deadly one, where their solar is meeting their needs for much of the day. In certain parts of the country, cloud cover builds up because it's hot, and it covers the solar panels before demand drops, and there's a sudden spike of like a 70% demand on the rest of the power producing entities, which are disappearing because they only get paid to operate for a couple hours a day. So now they're in crisis mode for something that nobody saw as even the potential of. And this happens everywhere, that when you get too reliant on intermittent power, but the messaging, the relentless messaging out of Ottawa and elsewhere has been, this is the future, just don't worry about it, we'll work all these bugs out. But you're playing with people's fuel. And a power system tends to fail at the most deadly times, on the hottest days and the coldest days, when it's stressed the most. And there will be a catastrophe coming because of this, where a lot of lives are lost. I think that's a safe prediction for jurisdictions that get too reliant on this, because you will have a failure at the worst time. We've had power blackout warnings in Alberta, of all places, because of the problems we've had in our grid. And then just one more note about the national aspect of this. And you mentioned the competitiveness. And one thing that concerns me about Carney's talk up to the election is that the tipping point for Canadians against the carbon tax was when people, such as I encounter in Nova Scotia, opened their utility bill and they went, what is this? Why is my bill so high? Carbon tax. And then there was a revolt on your hands. If it's in front of their face and it hits their bank account, they know it. They say, this is a problem. If Carney's smart enough to take it off individuals and put it on businesses where it's going to show up in your bill at the grocery store or when you buy a car or wherever it's embedded, and people are just going to blame the manufacturers, which is a very cunning and devious and horrible way to do it. Because then the voters blame business and and who's going to save you from those businesses? Big government. And so I think that's one of the most frightening aspects of his climate policy is he's
Interesting.
moving it to somewhere that will be out of the eyes of voters, and then that just plays into this energy ignorance problem we have.
Indeed. So energy is important, and lives are at stake, and Spain is a powerful illustration of that. We're reaching towards the end of our conversation, gentlemen. It's been really quite an eye-opening, frank conversation about where Canada's at. So, Nigel, if I could turn to you, where do you think are the key things that we need to look for as we go forward in the next few weeks? What are you looking for?
I am looking for Mr. Carney to deal with what the energy sector says it needs. He not only needs to promise it, he needs to do it. And if he does it, then there'll be a different conversation coming out of it. But if he communicates that he's not going to generate more pipeline corridors, he's not going to give Alberta and Saskatchewan a chance to sell their raw materials and expand, then people are going to say, well, I guess that's what it's going to be like. What are the alternatives? And he doesn't need to wait until June the 2nd when he has this meeting in Saskatoon. He needs to start now.
Now, so speaking of which, I want to share this interesting clip. I just came across this today by Premier Wab Kinew from the province of Manitoba, talking about a vision, very interesting concept, a big project of a national utility energy corridor that could go across the west to Hudson's Bay, perhaps it's Port Nelson, to get energy to market, because as you may know, at Frontier we released a energy discount calculator that shows powerfully, and you can see it on our website, the incredible discount, the money that we're leaving on the table, approximately $30 billion a year easily, that we're forfeiting because we don't get full market price. So here's Wab Kinew. I think the clip is here. Well, as we try to find that clip, the point is that that utility corridor, I think, is certainly one of the answers to building this country.
That could
creating
be the
nation-building projects.
interrupt. That could be the Nistanan corridor that's been proposed by many First
Yes.
Nations from Alberta through Saskatchewan and on Hudson Bay. And I've talked to the people that are behind it, trying to get it happening. It would be phenomenal if that. I assume that's what he's referring to.
I believe it is, yes.
The route for one of the main drivers of that is actually potash in Saskatchewan, or the producers, and one of their main markets is Brazil, and to get potash via Hudson Bay to Brazil is like 3,500 kilometers closer than going to the west coast. There's all sorts of advantages to it, and if the West can get projects like this off the ground, like that would be phenomenal. And I don't think Ottawa will like that. I think it's wresting too much power from Ottawa, but I think it's something to really fight for. I think it would be great.
Can you imagine that? It would be empowering First Nations. We'd improve our prices, our economic future, and we'd bypass the Quebec question.
It would be, Bruce? It would be way better than what we've got now, but let's be careful. I think, I didn't hear his explanation, but I think it sounds like a government program, like an energy program, like a house building program. Mm-hmm. This is one of the problems with our country. The government does everything. We don't know of any solutions to anything except for a government program, a government plan. I mean, so yeah, it's better than what you got now. Trapped without access to shipping. No question. But this is not solving the problem of the country. I mean, and I know I know Alberta's problems have a lot to do with money. And granted, fair enough. But it's not just money. I mean, I fear that the asks are all about money. Like they're all about pipeline. Don't interfere with our resources. I understand, and I agree.
Yes,
Totally agree.
yes.
But that's not the extent of the problem. You have to fix the Senate, for example. The Senate,
Indeed.
you need more seats in the Senate. You need an elected Senate. You need more representation in the House of Commons. You need a better balance in the Constitution. You need your own control over judge appointments. I mean, we have problems all the way down. And a Band-Aid pipeline or even a corridor, although it would improve things, especially for the short term, it would alleviate the heat. But that's what I'm concerned about. Something will be done to alleviate the heat, and you will lose this moment to make significant foundational change to the country.
Nicole Evans says, yes, Bruce. I think you're getting a lot of affirmation. So this is the bigger story. This is not just simply about an electoral outcome. It's about a reset that is required for this incredible country. We need to get our Constitution in shape, basic public policy, and frankly, we need to rebuild the balance between the room for citizens and their initiative and community and the size of government, quite frankly. So I think this is the larger themes that we've uncovered here, and I hope that this has been helpful to our audience. You've made incredible comments. Shelby says, if Alberta was on its own country right now, would it accept the current deal to join Canada? Great question. That is a plumb line, a standard, if you will, that puts this discussion into perspective, doesn't it? Would any colony join the proposed vision or idea as proposed by Sir John A. Macdonald and so many of the great founders of this country to come together and everybody live together in peace and harmony and prosperity with good order and government? So on that note, I want to thank everyone. Nigel Hannaford, opinion editor with the Western Standard, Bruce Pardy, faculty in law at Queen's, and of course Terry Etam, author and industry analyst coming from Calgary. It's been a pleasure, gentlemen, and I'm so grateful that we could talk about Canada today, and I want to thank our audience for joining us today, and be sure to join us next week, same time, same place on Leaders on the Frontier.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.